The concept of destiny is a scary one, isn't it? The idea that something is going to happen in your life no matter what choices you make. That an outcome has already been decided for you, and try as you might, any road you take will lead you straight to it. Because you can never outrun it. Sometimes I wonder if I have a destiny. If my fate has already been decided for me long before I was even born. If I do, I can only hope it's a good destiny. But even more so, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have a bad destiny. In July of 2013, Mattel launched Ever After High, a fairytale-inspired fashion doll line centered around the teenage children of characters from classic stories and legends. It was promoted as a sort of sister line to Mattel's wildly successful Monster High, but very quickly, Ever After High found its own identity and place in the market. Within just a few years, the brand had proven itself to be successful enough to expand beyond dolls and into webisodes, books, films, and other media, most of which was built around the franchise's central conflict. In this world, all students are expected to follow in their parents' footsteps to ensure their fairy tale stories continue being told. Some students, known as the Royals, embrace this responsibility and strive to fulfill their predetermined destinies, while other students, known as the Rebels, reject it and want the freedom to write their own stories. This setup naturally lends itself to exploring the wide variety of perspectives and challenges surrounding fate, legacy, and the cost of carrying a story you didn't choose, especially for the characters who don't exactly have an ending worth looking forward to. There are plenty of characters in the Ever After High universe that aren't destined for a happily ever after. Tiny the Giant falls to his death. Melody Piper will lure children away to presumably their death, and Briar Beauty will sleep for 100 years, waking up to all her friends elderly or gone. But there's a handful of characters who have especially bad destinies. Fairy tales can be notoriously gruesome and cruel, and though the world of Ever After might try to hide that fact, behind the polished facade, some students are forced to live with the knowledge that their stories are full of suffering. Whether it's burning to death or being tortured and traumatized, these are the endings that make you stop and wonder how anyone in the world of Ever After could possibly be expected to willingly fulfill them. Because these are the worst destinies in Ever After High. But first, a quick note. In the world of Ever After High, destinies have always been a little bit iffy. The very laws of the universe are structured around stories continuing themselves, meaning that fairy tale characters must have children so that their tales can go on being told. So characters can't really die, and therefore their stories are significantly more family friendly, or as I like to call them, Ever Afterified. This is alongside the fact that the characters' destinies are a lot less set in stone than the beginning of the series makes them out to be. In the book Next Top Villain, Headmaster Grimm made it clear that the characters can change their destinies. And at the end of the Way to Wonderland film, the characters' destinies are returned to them, allowing them to write their own stories. But we're going to pretend that literally none of that is true. In this video, we will be looking at the characters' destinies based on their original fairy tale, and we'll be discussing them in a way that assumes the characters will follow that destiny. So yes, characters can canonically avoid their horrific fates, and their Ever Afterified endings might not even be that horrific. But this is my video, and I think the concept is more interesting when we look at the original tales. Got it? Good. So with all that said, let's actually start the video. Raven Queen is one of the dual protagonists of the Ever After High franchise and the sort of leader of the rebel side. She debuted in May of 2013 in the very first webisode The World of Ever After High before receiving her first doll 2 months later as part of the first wave of signature or core dolls. And as the World of Ever After High's poster girl for rewriting Destiny, it's unsurprising that Raven Queen is often one of the first characters brought up when discussing who has the worst ending. Raven Queen is the daughter of the Evil Queen, the villain from the German fairy tale Snow White, first published by the Brothers Grimm in 1812. And while Snow White, as one of the most famous fairy tales in history, has been retold more times than is realistic to count, most famously of course by Disney in 1937, almost every version has one thing in common. The Evil Queen suffers one of the most horrific punishments in fairy tale history. In the Ever After High universe, on the day the characters agree to follow their destiny, also known as Legacy Day, they are able to see their fate via the Storybook of Legends. And on this day, Raven is shown she'll be shunned by her peers, cast out of society, and eventually imprisoned for life. Which of course is pretty bad, but it's nowhere near as bad as her destiny based on her original tale. In the original Grimm version of Snow White, after failing to have the titular princess murdered and later infamously poisoning her with an apple, the Evil Queen is caught and punished. What is her punishment? Well, during Snow White's wedding, she is forced to wear a pair of red-hot iron shoes and dance until she collapses and dies. So Raven Queen's destiny is quite literally to be tortured to death in front of an audience. And mind you, she'll only die when her body can physically no longer keep her alive. Raven Queen is an incredibly kind, generous, and empathetic character who doesn't even want to poison Applewhite, the daughter of Snow White, in the first place. So of course she wouldn't want to face the awful punishment for doing so either. But at the end of the day, she won't have a choice.
My happily ever after starts now.
Meeshell Mermaid is one of the lesser-known Ever After High characters, being one of the few later additions to the cast, with her debuting in 2016 during the franchise's not-so-super-popular rebrand. But she's definitely an underrated character. She's shy and prefers being in her mermaid form over her human one, but she's also an incredibly talented singer, not unlike her mother, the Little Mermaid from the 1837 Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale of the same name. Like the story of Snow White, most modern audiences were introduced to the Little Mermaid thanks to the Disney retelling from 1989. But as usual, Disney took some creative liberties when it came to adapting the fairy tale in order to make it more appealing to younger audiences. The core premise of the tale remained the same. After saving a prince from drowning, a young mermaid gives up her voice in exchange for legs so that she can go to the human world and be with him. But like many classic fairy tales, the original version is much more gruesome. Unlike Disney's version, in the original Andersen tale, and therefore in Meeshell's destiny, when the Little Mermaid gives her voice to the sea witch in exchange for legs, it isn't magically stored in a glowing seashell, but rather the mermaid's tongue is cut out. And she drinks a potion that is so painful it's described as feeling like a sword passing through her body. And just for a bit of extra fun, her human legs make her a great dancer, but every step she takes feels like she's walking on knives. But at least she still has the man she loves. After spending time together, the prince and the Little Mermaid become incredibly close. He finds her indescribably beautiful, and despite her pain, she dances for him as an act of devotion. And as the tale nears its end, it seems like Meeshell will get the love she desires, her happily ever after. Until the prince confesses he can never marry her. He admits that he loves her but is saving his heart for another, and goes on to wed a neighbouring princess believing she is the girl that saved him from drowning. A marriage that, according to the sea witch's bargain, condemns the Little Mermaid to death. The mermaid sisters do try to save her. They exchange their beautiful hair for a dagger that, if Meeshell uses to kill the prince, will allow her to return to the ocean as a mermaid and reunite with her family. But she just can't bring herself to kill her love. Instead, at the end of her story, Meeshell will throw herself into the ocean and dissolve into beautiful sea foam. And though she does become a spirit who can earn a soul, something mermaids don't have, and go to heaven by doing good deeds for hundreds of years, considering all the pain she suffers before that, I don't know if I'd be happy with that ending. So Meeshell will sacrifice her life with her family, suffer extreme physical pain, and have her heart broken, only to die anyway. But I mean, at least Meeshell dies before her suffering can get any worse. Which sounds great until you remember that surviving suffering means you have to learn to live with it. Cerise Hood is by far my favourite Ever After High character, and that's mainly because of how complex and nuanced she is as a person. She's loyal to and protective of the people she loves, but she's also incredibly standoffish and is forced to hide a pretty big secret, one that she's had since she debuted with the franchise's launch. But it's also always been interesting to me that as the daughter of Little Red Riding Hood, Cerise will survive her destiny, yet she still identifies as a rebel. So why is that? The Little Red Riding Hood story is believed to have first been printed by Charles Perrault in the 17th century before later being popularized by the Brothers Grimm in the 19th. And based on Ever After High's world building, the latter of which is the story Cerise is set to live out. But in both versions of the story, Little Red is a young girl in a red cape who is sent into the woods to deliver food to her sick grandmother. On her journey, she encounters a wolf who, unbeknownst to the naive girl, wants to eat her and her granny. So after accidentally telling the wolf the location of her grandmother's cottage, the wolf rushes ahead. There, he eats the old woman and disguises himself in her clothing, lying in wait by the time Little Red arrives. And though Little Red does question her supposed grandmother's unusually large ears and eyes, the wolf is able to brush off Red's concerns. Before finally, Little Red notes what big teeth she has, and the wolf reveals himself, admitting all the better to eat you up with. And as you could guess, the wolf eats her. If this were Perrault's version of the story, which is a much more obvious warning of the dangers of older men taking advantage of young girls, that would mark the end. Cerise's destiny would simply be devoured by a wolf after accidentally leading him straight to her grandmother, which on a psychological level is certainly a lot. But the Brothers Grimm chose to extend upon that ending. In their version, a huntsman hears the wolf snoring and quickly realizes what happened, cutting open the wolf's stomach and rescuing both somehow still alive victims. Little Red Riding Hood then fills the wolf's stomach with rocks so that when he wakes up, the weight causes him to collapse and die. So Cerise will survive, though she'll undeniably be traumatized and likely feel somewhat responsible for what happened to her grandmother. And of course, she'll have to live with the memory of her and her grandmother quite literally being eaten alive and then watching a wolf die a pretty violent death. Which, when you think about it like that, makes sense as to why she's a rebel and wants to write her own destiny. Well, that and the way her secret impacts her future. But hey, at least she lives. Though the same can't be said for the other major player in her story.
Poor Cerise. It is their destiny to be enemies.
What's, so exciting?
Me.
Ramona Badwolf, the daughter of the Big Bad Wolf, debuted in 2016 and, like Cerise, is destined to live out the Little Red Riding Hood tale, but in her case as the villain. Though interestingly, it's also implied in the webisodes that she's also destined to live out the Three Little Pigs story.
I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow you to class!
The Three Little Pigs is a popular English fable dating back to the 1800s, and follows three little pigs who each build a house of different materials, only for each of them to be blown down by the Big Bad Wolf. That is until the third pig's house, which is built of brick and therefore unable to be destroyed. Out of rage, the Big Bad Wolf attempts to enter the house via the chimney, only to fall into a pot of water, boil to death, and be eaten. Depending on the version of the story you read, the wolf may also eat two of the three little pigs, which sucks for them and their destiny. But in almost every iteration of the fable, Ramona is destined to die a slow and painful death. Not unlike her destiny in the Little Red Riding Hood tale. As you should recall from literally a couple of minutes ago, Ramona will eat the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood, have her stomach cut open, and die. So Ramona has not one, but two violent destinies. Which is bad enough as it is, but there's one detail of her Little Red Riding Hood fate I haven't mentioned. Of course, the Big Bad Wolf eats Little Red Riding Hood, which means Ramona and Cerise's destinies intersect in a pretty gruesome way. But what makes it even more horrific is that if Ramona follows her destiny, she will eat her own sister. In the October 2016 webisode A Big Bad Secret, it was revealed that Cerise Hood and Ramona Badwolf were sisters, with Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf having secretly married. The two met while studying at Ever After High when they were forced to work together on a theatre project, and whilst they initially didn't get along, they quickly fell in love, and as revealed in the September 2014 webisode, Cerise's picnic panic went on to marry and have children. This is Cerise's secret and why Cerise is a rebel. Cerise has wolf ears and werewolf-like abilities passed down from her father. And at the end of the day, both her and Ramona technically never should have been born. Their literal existence is denying fate. Oh, and it's also worth mentioning that even if they fulfill the ever afterified version of their tale where no one gets eaten and no one dies, they will both still live a pretty miserable future. Due to their family secret, the two will always have to play the role of somewhat enemies. And for the rest of time, their descendants will have to live out the same horrible fairy tale knowing that all the players share a bloodline. Which is why both Ramona and Cerise don't want to fulfill their destinies. They would have to commit terrible acts of violence against each other and tear apart their family in the process. Or best case scenario, they have to live the lie that they hate each other for the rest of their lives. So they're not rebels for themselves, they're rebels for each other, fighting so that neither of them have to live out their horrible destinies.
Yeah. If anyone knew the Big Bad Wolf was married to Little Red,
They'd flip their crowns.
Duchess Swan is another royal that's been with Ever After High from the beginning of the franchise, though unlike most of the other characters, Duchess isn't destined to live out a traditional fairy tale or fable. Instead, Duchess Swan is the daughter of the Swan Princess from the 1875-76 ballet Swan Lake. Composed by Tchaikovsky, the performance, which is believed to have been based on the story written by Johann Carl August Musars, is one of the most famous ballets ever, both because of its now iconic soundtrack and story, but also because of its pretty morbid ending, meaning Duchess is one of the few characters that identifies as a royal despite having a horrible destiny. Like her mother, Duchess is destined to be cursed by an evil sorcerer. By day she will be a beautiful swan and by night a human, with the only way to break the curse being an eternal vow of love from someone who truly cares for her. And thankfully she will get that. In the story, a prince falls in love with the Swan Princess and her with him, so after he promises to break her curse, he invites her to his ball. But alas, Swan Lake is ultimately a tragedy. And when the sorcerer sends his daughter to the ball disguised as the Swan Princess, the prince falls for the trick, unknowingly breaking his vow and dooming Duchess to be a swan forever. When the prince realizes his mistake, he will beg the Swan Princess for her forgiveness, but not wanting to live the rest of her life as a swan, Duchess instead will choose to die. Though like Meeshell, there is a silver lining, sort of. The prince will choose to die as well, and the two lovers will reunite in heaven where they spend eternity together. And their sacrifices will inspire the other swans to rebel against the sorcerer, which causes their curses to be broken. So once again, a character is destined to have her heart broken and die not long after. Fun. Duchess Swan, like Briar Beauty, is one of the few royals who at some point in Ever After High's run had doubts about following their destiny. She's quite bitter towards other princesses, and in the 2015 book Next Top Villain, Duchess begins to consider taking on the destiny of the evil queen. Though ultimately, the book ends with her coming to terms with the fact that she can work towards whatever destiny she wants, which is presumably not being cursed to be a swan forever, but killing herself before it can happen. Ginger Breadhouse is another incredibly underrated Ever After High character, and another one of my personal favourites. Ginger was first introduced in the 2014 book The Unfairest of Them All, and is a shy and kind baker who loves to make treats for her friends, despite the fact that the other students often worry they are poisoned. This of course is because Ginger is the daughter of the infamous witch from the 1812 German tale Hansel and Gretel, the story that condemns Ginger to her fate. In the story published by the Brothers Grimm, the titular siblings are abandoned in the woods by their parents, and though they initially manage to return home by following a trail of pebbles, they are soon abandoned again with no way to retrace their steps. So starving and desperate, they stumble upon a cottage made of sweets and quickly begin eating it, unaware that the house belongs to a witch, Ginger's future role. The witch lures them inside with the intention to eat the two children, presumably as she's done plenty of times before. However, before she can, Hansel and Gretel are able to trick the witch into going inside her own oven where she burns alive, allowing Hansel and Gretel to escape, but subjecting the witch and therefore Ginger to an incredibly slow and painful death. In fact, burning to death in this manner is often considered one of the most infamously painful forms of death known to man. In ancient Greece, there was a torture device known as the brazen bull, in which allegedly, those sentenced to death were slowly roasted inside while their screams emulated the sound of a bull. Later in history, Gyorgy Dorje, a rebel leader in the Kingdom of Hungary, was executed by being forced to sit on a heated iron throne while wearing a heated iron crown in the 16th century. And of course, there's being burnt at the stake, which is most often thought of in the context of witch hunts, but historically was one of the most common ancient forms of execution. Considering how kind Ginger is and how her greatest desire is simply to bring joy to others through her baking, her death certainly feels like a disproportionately cruel ending. She wants to live a life outside her mother's legacy and hates the idea of hurting people, yet she is destined to become a cannibal, not the Kesha kind, eat children and die a slow and painful death. And like Raven, Cerise, and Ramona, even in the Ever After-ified version of her story where the witch doesn't die, Ginger is still going to be unhappy. She will be ostracized and driven out of society, and everyone around her will refuse to eat what she bakes because they fear she will try to eat them. All things considered, it's no wonder she hates her destiny.
I can't believe they think you're going to follow your story.
I know.
After looking at the most tragic, gruesome, and emotionally devastating destinies in Ever After High, the question naturally arises of which character has the worst fate. And ultimately, that answer will depend on how you define the worst. If the worst is measured based on physical pain, Ginger Breadhouse likely takes the cake. Mind the pun. Having to eat children to survive and then being burnt alive in an oven is a terrible way to go, especially when it's a death caused by these little shits. If the character who goes through the most emotional pain has the worst destiny, it's probably Meeshell Mermaid, who watches everything and everyone she loves slip away from her only to dissolve into sea foam and become a spirit, who might get into heaven. Duchess also gets incredibly close to her happy ending only for it to be taken away from her at the last minute, but she does get to be reunited with her lover, something Meeshell will never experience. But if we are talking pure existential horror, an ending that is incredibly painful both physically and mentally, Ramona Badwolf probably has the worst destiny of all. The fact that she has two destinies that result in her horrific death is enough of a justification behind my logic, but her Little Red Riding Hood story is especially awful. She literally has to eat her own sister and then be killed by her. That sucks! But ultimately, the point of deep diving these horrible destinies isn't to rank them by suffering. It's mainly to understand why Ever After High rebels exist in the first place. The whole royal versus rebel conflict is often boiled down to the idea that those wanting to go against their predetermined destinies are selfish. But when your fate includes torture, heartbreak, cannibalism, death, losing your friends, and even more fun weekend activities, why wouldn't you want to write your own story? I guess guess if anything, looking at these destinies makes one realize that we as real people are incredibly lucky. We get to make choices, take risks, change our courses, and ultimately work towards the ending we want. If destiny is real, in our world it's more of a guide to our life than a magical book that basically forces us to fulfill it. And I mean, thank God for that, because destiny f***ing sucks.